Her name was everywhere, splashed across headlines, whispered in rooms where power decided who survived. A scandal was unfolding in Korea, quietly, strategically, designed to erase her completely. And standing at the center of it all was a man who had never lost control. Jun-suk was a billionaire lawyer feared in every courtroom. Cold, controlled, untouchable. A man who believed power mattered more than people. And tenderness was a weakness he couldn't afford. Angela was a bold, kind black woman. Intelligent, principled, and impossible to silence. A woman who refused to bend, even when the world tried to erase her. When their paths collided in Korea, it wasn't love at first sight. It was resistance. He tried to protect her from the shadows of his world by keeping her at a distance. She refused to be someone's secret, someone's silence, someone's almost. Then the trap closed. Her name was dragged deeper into a scandal meant to break her. And he was given a choice. Save his power, or stand beside her and lose everything. For the first time in his life, the man who controlled everything chose love over safety, truth over power, and tenderness over fear. This is not just a love story. It's a story about choosing courage, about love that costs something, and about a man who learned too late that control is not strength. Honesty is. If you enjoy interesting Afro-Korean dramas like this, do well to hit the subscribe button, because here you'll find a lot of romantic, thrilling, and exciting Afro-Korean billionaire love stories. Jun-suk learned early that emotions were liabilities. Not because anyone taught him that directly, but because the world rewarded him every time he buried them. In Korea's most powerful circles, he was known as a man who never hesitated, never softened, never lost control. A billionaire lawyer whose presence alone could shift negotiations before a single word was spoken. He did not raise his voice. He did not threaten. He simply waited. And people folded. But have you ever wondered what kind of man becomes powerful by never allowing himself to feel? And what kind of loneliness hides behind that kind of discipline? Jun-suk grew up in wealth, but not warmth. Homes filled with marble and glass. Dinners eaten separately. Parents whose calendars mattered more than birthdays. Affection was replaced with expectation. Success was the only language spoken fluently. So he mastered it. Degrees, deals, dominance. And by the time he was 35, the world had already decided who he was allowed to be. Untouchable, unmovable, unreachable. Women came and went, but never stayed. Not because he rejected them, but because he never let them arrive. And then, Angela stepped into his world. She did not arrive loudly. No spectacle. No hunger for attention. She arrived the way storms do. Quiet at first, then impossible to ignore. A black woman, working in international policy reform, navigating systems designed to exhaust people like her. She had learned the cost of silence early in life, so she refused to pay it. She spoke with clarity, not aggression. Confidence and not arrogance. Kindness, not submission. And people felt it. Now ask yourself this. What happens when a woman refuses to shrink in rooms built to erase her? Their first meeting was brief, professional, unremarkable to anyone watching. But something shifted. He noticed how she held eye contact, not defiantly, not submissively, just honestly. She noticed how he listened not with curiosity, but calculation. They were not impressed by each other. And that unsettled them both. Their paths crossed again. Then again. Conversations grew longer. Still careful. Still restrained. He admired her mind. She questioned his distance. And somewhere between late-night discussions and silent pauses, something dangerous began to form. Not desire. Recognition. Have you ever met someone who saw through the version of yourself you show the world? Someone who didn't chase you but didn't retreat either? That's when control becomes fragile. Jun Suk kept her close, but not visible. Private dinners. Unscheduled walks. Moments without names. He told himself it was protection. But protection without acknowledgement is just another form of hiding. She felt it, and she did not ignore it. One evening, she asked him something simple. Not emotional. Not accusatory. Why won't you meet me in daylight? The question lingered. He hesitated. And in that hesitation, she saw the truth. Have you ever realized someone's answer before they speak? That silence told her everything. She did not fight. She did not demand. She simply said, I won't be someone's secret. And she walked away, leaving behind a man who had mastered control, but had never learned how to choose. Jun Suk told himself walking away was discipline. That letting her leave was respect. That not reaching for her was maturity. But discipline, when taken too far, becomes punishment. And respect, when mixed with fear, turns into avoidance. Days passed. Then weeks. Angela returned fully to her work, immersing herself in systems that resisted change and rooms that tested patience. She moved forward the way she always had, quietly, steadily, without complaint. Yet something lingered. Not regret. Awareness. Have you ever walked away from something knowing it was right, and still felt the absence like a bruise you didn't remember earning? Jun Suk watched her from afar. Not deliberately at first. Then, deliberately. He read policy briefs she authored, noted how her ideas carried through committees, heard her name spoken with a mix of admiration and discomfort. She wasn't loud. She wasn't reckless. She was effective. And effectiveness, in certain circles, is the most dangerous thing a woman can be. Especially one who refuses to be owned. They met again by accident. Or maybe by gravity. A courthouse corridor. Neutral ground. No expectations. No rehearsed words. She looked at him, not surprised, not resentful. Just present. You look the same, she said. You don't, he replied. She smiled faintly. That's what happens when you stop waiting. That sentence stayed with him longer than it should have. They began speaking again. Not as before. More cautiously. More honestly. They walked, sometimes no destination, no agenda. Shared coffee in quiet places where no one recognized him. And slowly, without realizing it, he began to unlearn something. He listened. Not to respond. Not to manage. But to understand. She spoke about her childhood. About learning early that softness could be mistaken for weakness. About choosing kindness anyway and accepting the cost. He spoke about silence. About control. About a life built so carefully that nothing could enter without permission. And in those conversations, something subtle changed. Have you ever noticed how intimacy doesn't arrive loudly? How it slips in through listening? He still didn't touch her. Not her hand. Not her shoulder. That restraint felt noble. Until it didn't. One evening, rain trapped them beneath a narrow awning. The city blurred around them. She was close enough to feel his warmth. He was close enough to feel the risk. You could stay, he said quietly. She looked at him, not longing, not pleading. Measuring. If I stay, she said, I need to know you won't confuse closeness with permission. His breath slowed. I won't, he said. She nodded. Then, stepped away. And for the first time, he understood something painful. Restraint, when driven by fear, can feel colder than rejection. The misunderstanding began subtly. A photograph surfaced online. Then another. An article followed. Speculative. Carefully worded. It positioned him beside another woman politically convenient, strategically aligned. The implication was clear. Angela read it once, then closed her laptop. Have you ever felt something settle inside you, not anger, but certainty? That was what she felt. He assumed silence meant caution, that she was protecting herself. So he didn't correct the narrative, didn't clarify, didn't deny. He told himself this was wisdom. That timing mattered. That control still served a purpose. But control, once again, cost him more than he realized. When they met again, the air between them was different. Not hostile. Final. You didn't stop it, she said calmly. I thought you needed distance, he replied. I needed truth, she said. And suddenly, all his carefully built explanations felt thin. She stepped back, not dramatically, not angrily. I won't be someone's almost, she said softly. And I won't be someone's silence. Have you ever noticed how dignity doesn't shout when it leaves? It simply walks away. This time, she did not wait. She did not hope. She chose herself. And this time, he felt the loss immediately. Not as absence, but as understanding arriving too late. Power never announces itself when it turns dangerous. It doesn't shout. It doesn't threaten. It smiles. Angela felt it before she saw it. A shift in tone during meetings. A hesitation in replies that used to be prompt. Questions that circled her work without touching it directly. Curiosity, they called it. But curiosity can be a weapon when aimed correctly. Have you ever sensed a room turning against you before anyone said a word? That was the air around her now. The article came out on a Tuesday morning. Strategic timing. Midweek. Enough distance from the weekend to control the narrative. It didn't accuse. It suggested foreign interests, hidden influence, ambition disguised as advocacy. Her name was there but carefully framed. Not guilty. Suspicious. That was worse. Because suspicion sticks. She read it once. Then again. Not to absorb the words, but to understand the intent. This wasn't journalism. This was pressure. And she knew exactly where it was coming from. People who didn't like that she refused to compromise. People who had asked her to soften her stance and been denied. People who had something to lose. Meanwhile, Jun-suk was summoned. Not urgently. Not officially. An invitation. Glass walls. Muted voices. Men who spoke as if they were offering help. We can make this disappear, one of them said calmly. Quietly. All it would require was distance. A statement. A clarification. A denial of association. She's strong, another added. She'll recover. Have you ever noticed how cruelty sounds polite when it's wrapped in power? He didn't answer immediately. And in that pause, he finally saw the shape of the trap. Angela wasn't collateral. She was leverage. They were forcing him to choose. And for the first time in his life, every option felt wrong. He thought about her question. Why won't you meet me in daylight? He had told himself it was strategy. Now he saw the truth. He had been preparing for this moment all along. By keeping her far enough away that he could deny responsibility. And that realization hollowed him out. Angela didn't call him. She didn't ask for reassurance. She moved the way she always had forward. She gathered documentation. Opened files. Prepared for exposure. She had lived her life knowing protection was never guaranteed. Only integrity was. But still. Have you ever been strong long enough to wish? Just once. Someone else would step forward for you. The backlash intensified. Panels withdrew invitations. Committees postponed hearings. Her credibility became under review. Not condemned. Suspended. That gray zone where reputations quietly bleed. And through it all, she remained composed. Not because she wasn't afraid, but because fear had never been allowed to decide her fate. Jun Sok watched everything unravel. And for the first time, control did not comfort him. It accused him. Because silence now meant complicity. And restraint now meant betrayal. Jun Sok went to her. No notice. No protection. She opened the door and immediately understood. You shouldn't be here, she said. I know. He looked at her, really looked. Not the woman who challenged him. Not the woman who walked away. But the woman being targeted for refusing to bend. They're using you to reach me, he said. She nodded. I assumed as much. They offered me protection, he continued. In exchange for your silence. She didn't flinch. Did you accept? The question hung between them. Have you ever waited for an answer, knowing it could break something permanently? No, he said. She searched his face. You didn't hesitate? I did, he admitted. And that's what I'm ashamed of. The honesty landed differently than promises ever had. I was wrong, he continued. I thought keeping you distant was care. It was fear. She said nothing. So he went further. I won't protect myself at your expense. Not again. An apology without action, she said quietly, is just rehearsal. I know. He took a breath. I'm stepping forward, publicly, fully. Her expression tightened not with hope, but concern. Do you understand what that costs you? Yes. And you're still doing it? Yes. Why? And this time, he didn't reach for logic. Because losing power scares me less than losing you. She didn't answer immediately. Because this wasn't a romantic moment. It was a reckoning. Have you ever watched someone finally become who they claim to be? The press conference happened within hours. No handlers. No statement. Just him. He spoke plainly. He withdrew from nominations. Rejected appointments. Named the manipulation for what it was. He spoke her name without flinching. Defended her integrity without qualification. And then, he walked away. The fallout was immediate. Phones stopped ringing. Doors closed. Invitations evaporated. But something else happened too. People started asking questions. Real ones. Files resurfaced. Timelines cracked. Truth crept back into the room. Angela watched from a distance. Not relieved. Not triumphant. Thoughtful. Because sacrifice alone doesn't equal change. Consistency does. And she needed to see what came next. Power leaves more loudly than it arrives. Not with alarms. Not with confrontation. But with absence. The calls stopped first. Then the invitations. Then the unspoken privileges he had never noticed until they were gone. The world did not punish him. It simply moved on. And for a man who had always been at the center of motion, that silence was unfamiliar. Uncomfortable. Honest. Have you ever lost something you didn't realize you were leaning on until it disappeared? Jun Sok downsized. Not dramatically, practically. A smaller office. Fewer staff. No assistants hovering with calendars and contingency plans. For the first time in decades, his days belonged to him. And he didn't know what to do with that freedom. Angela watched carefully. Not from suspicion, from wisdom. She had learned long ago that sacrifice can be temporary, but character reveals itself over time. He didn't chase attention, didn't craft a redemption narrative, didn't use her vindication as proof of his virtue. He worked quietly. He took cases others avoided. Cases without prestige. Cases without cameras. Not to rebuild power, but to rebuild meaning. Weeks passed. Then months. They spoke occasionally. Not often. Not with urgency. He didn't ask for forgiveness again. He didn't pressure her to return. And that restraint, this time, felt different. Have you ever noticed how patience feels warmer when it's no longer afraid? Angela's name was cleared publicly. The investigation concluded. The whispers dissolved. She received invitations again. This time, with respect instead of curiosity. She stood taller not because she had won, but because she had endured without bending. And still, she hesitated. Because choosing someone is not about what they lose for you. It's about who they are after the loss. They met again. No tension. No performance. Just two people sitting across from each other in a quiet space. You look lighter, she said. I am, he replied. She studied him. Not because you're free, she clarified, but because you're no longer hiding. He nodded. I didn't know how heavy fear was until I set it down. She exhaled slowly. Why didn't you come back sooner? She asked. Because I didn't want to ask you to trust a version of me that was still learning how to stand. That answer mattered. They walked afterward. No destination. No plan. The city moved around them like a river. At one point, he stopped. I need to say something, he said. She waited. I don't expect you to return. I don't believe sacrifice buys love, and I don't want gratitude. He looked at her fully. I want the chance to choose you every day without hiding. Have you ever heard someone speak without trying to persuade? That was the moment she noticed the difference. She didn't answer immediately. Because love is not a reflex. It is a decision. And decisions require clarity. Days later, she reached for him first. Not dramatically. Not emotionally. Simply, come walk with me. He did. And when she took his hand, there was no hesitation. No fear. No armor. Their love did not announce itself. It unfolded. He listened more than he spoke. She challenged him without guarding herself. They argued without cruelty. They chose repair over pride. For the first time, tenderness was not a risk. It was shared ground. And yet, there was one final test. Because love that survives loss must still survive truth. Love, when it is real, eventually asks a harder question. Not, will you stay? But, who will you be when staying costs you comfort? That question arrived quietly. Not through conflict. Not through scandal. But through family. Jun Sok's parents returned to Seoul with the same confidence they had always carried. Wealth had preserved their posture. Power had preserved their certainty. They congratulated him on his phase. Then they offered him a future. A return to influence. A pathway back to prestige. A role designed perfectly for the man he used to be. There was only one condition. Distance. She complicates your image, his mother said gently. This world is not built for sentiment. Have you ever noticed how control often disguises itself as concern? He listened, not silently, thoughtfully. For the first time, he did not feel small in their presence, because he was no longer seeking their approval. "I've already chosen," he said calmly. They assumed he meant strategy. He meant her. Angela learned of the conversation days later. Not from him, from the world. The rumors returned, softer this time. Speculation. Whispers of inevitability. She didn't confront him immediately. She waited. Because she had learned the difference between promises and patterns. Have you ever stayed silent not because you were afraid but because you were watching? When she finally spoke, it was simple. "If your life needs me to be smaller," she said, "then we should stop pretending love will make that feel acceptable." He didn't interrupt. Didn't reassure. Didn't argue. "I don't want you to shrink," he said. "I want you to expand even if that expansion doesn't center me." That answer mattered. The final test came not from power but from vulnerability. He was offered everything he once wanted. She offered nothing but truth. And in that contrast, his choice was clear. He declined the offer. Publicly. Irrevocably. Not to prove devotion, but because returning would have required him to become someone she never fell in love with. They built a life slowly. Intentionally. Without spectacle. Mornings with quiet conversation. Evenings with shared work and shared rest. Disagreements handled without dominance. He learned how to receive love without trying to manage it. She learned how to be loved without guarding herself. And that balance, that mutual surrender, was where peace lived. One evening, much later, she asked him something unexpected. "Do you ever miss who you used to be?" He considered the question carefully. "I miss the certainty," he said, "but not the emptiness." Then he asked her, "Do you ever regret choosing me?" She smiled softly. "No," she said, "but I'm glad you didn't choose me because you had to." The proposal was quiet. No audience. No announcement. Just truth spoken plainly. "I choose you," he said. "Not as refuge, not as rebellion, but as home." She said yes. Because this time, there was no fear behind the tenderness. Their story never became legend. It didn't need to. It became something rarer. Sustainable. Because love that survives daylight doesn't need darkness to feel intense. And so, the man who once believed love was something to guard finally understood. Love is something you step into unarmored. And the bravest thing a powerful man can do is choose it without protection. Before you leave this story, ask yourself, if love required you to step into daylight, without control, without safety, would you choose it? Before you leave. If you enjoyed this story, please hit the subscribe button below, so you don't miss more romantic, thrilling, and emotionally rich Afro-Korean stories like this. Now, thank you for listening all the way to the end. Stories like this aren't just meant to be heard. They're meant to be felt. And I'd really love to hear from you. What kind of story would you love to listen to next? Was there a moment in this story that stayed with you? A scene that made you pause, think, or see something differently? Tell us your favorite part of the story. And if this story taught you something about love, power, courage, or choosing yourself, share the lesson you took from it. I genuinely love listening to the thoughts and opinions of my listeners. Your voice matters here. Leave a comment, and let's keep the conversation going. Until the next story, take care.